You're watching LMCC.
Good evening, everybody. Going to talk about all the different churches in Excelsior over the last 100-some years. 14 different churches in Excelsior during that time. Excelsior, as Kristen said, was founded in 1853, and the very first church in Excelsior was the Congregational Church of Excelsior. Yes, let's hear it for the Congregationalists. Woohoo! They were founded July 17, 1853, and originally they were housed in the different personal houses of the congregants here in Excelsior. But one of the very first places that they were meeting was this building right here. It was a Galpin house. It was built by George Galpin in 1853. At this time in 1876, it is the kitchen wing of the Excelsior house. And they were in that building from 1853 to 1857 when Excelsior's very first schoolhouse was built. Now this was a dual function schoolhouse. The bottom floor was for schools. The upper floor housed the Congregational Church of Excelsior. And today, that 1857 building still exists over on 3rd Street, just the other side of City Hall. It's been altered a little bit, but this part right here had brick put on it, so the original building is underneath there. The very first minister was Charles Galpin, and he was the one that formed the church on July 17th, 1853. You can see him on the left as a young man about the time that he would have arrived in Excelsior, and over on the right side would be him right about the time of his death in 1872 here in Excelsior. He only led the church for 2 years when he handed off the reins to Reverend Charles Sheldon, who would run the church for the next 27 years. It was in 1871 that they finally built the church. It was up here on the hill, and the church has an address of 371 3rd Street. And you look at the church today and I said, oh, why isn't it School Avenue? Because it doesn't face 3rd Street. But this original building did. Here you can see in the background is the old school building that was built in 1884. And then looking down 3rd Street, that's how it looked today. So School Avenue is right here. And then this is 3rd Street going down to the brewery where we're at right there. It was on February 13th, 1935 that our valiant Excelsior Volunteer Fire Department saved the church with only about $1,000 worth of damage. There was a stovepipe that the metal got thin and the fire went up into the attic area, but they were able to save the church. This is the inside of the church, and if you were going into the church today, you would see this same picture in the narthex. They tore down the church and built the new one in 1970. You can see it under construction here. And this is how it looked just a few years ago, and the interior. The second church I'll talk about is Trinity Episcopal Church. It was founded on Trinity Sunday, 1854, by Reverend Jacob Sherrill Chamberlain. He was the son-in-law of Bishop Chase, Philander Chase of the Diocese of Illinois. He came to St. Anthony Falls in 1852, and in 1853 people started coming out here. 1854 on Trinity Sunday, he held the very first service in what was then St. Albans. Here's Reverend Chamberlain he operated what was known as the St. Anthony Falls Mission Trust. And he was the pastor for all of these different churches. So he was an itinerant minister. He traveled to each one of these. This was part of his plan, however, was to gain control over the entire diocese. This was part of his power play. He was going to be a bishop. He was determined to be a bishop, because with this mission trust, he controlled the voting rights at the diocesan assembly to vote for each one of these churches. So he was going to essentially elect himself bishop. So in 1854, he came out to Lake Minnetonka, and this is the city of St. Albans on Lake Minnetonka. That's the official name of the town. Before this, it had been called Port of Minnetonka, and it was first settled by John Hamilton McKenzie, and he made the mistake of leaving it in the hands of Charles Morris and Charles Hargan, and then going to Illinois to get married. Well, in his absence, Morris and Hargan jumped his claim and replatted it as the city of St. Albans on Lake Minnetonka. McKenzie had a sawmill that was built, and it was located right here. This is the mill. But he also built a log two-story hotel, which he called McKenzie's Hotel, original name. And so Morris and Hargan, trying to legitimize what they had done, said, well, we'll give this hotel to the Episcopal Church, and they gave it to Reverend Chamberlain to make it into a church. So they took out the second floor timbers, opened it up, and made it into the church. And here you can see the location of the church was right here, over at 5480 Maple Heights Road, approximately. But things didn't go well for St. Albans. The mill burned in 1857, and population had already really started transferring over towards Excelsior anyway, so it wasn't much of a stretch. So in 1862, they did all the concrete work for the Episcopal Church. It's a jump form, monolithic concrete building. And then there was the Dakota War that took place in August of 1862, and all construction stopped. So it wasn't finished until 1863. At this time, Reverend Chamberlain was already on the outs, and his plans of being bishop had already been dashed, because he was running afoul of his bishop, Bishop Jackson Kemper, who was Bishop of the Northwest. He was stationed out near Milwaukee, Wisconsin. To avert Chamberlain getting into being the Minnesota bishop, he very surreptitiously installed and consecrated Bishop Benjamin Whipple as Bishop of Minnesota, and he did that in Milwaukee so that there wouldn't even be a chance. He just kind of beat Chamberlain to the punch. So almost as soon as Trinity Episcopal Chapel was opened here in Excelsior, Chamberlain departed. And this structure was just half a block or more away from us on 3rd Street, right across the street from the City Hall, about where the library, old library is. It was about directly across the street from there. But it didn't work out that well. In 1907, the streetcar company decided we're going to run a track out to Tonka Bay. The church had to be moved, so it was raised up and it was moved to its current location at Center and 2nd Street. And my great-grandparents, on October 31st, 1907, were married in the chapel as you see it in this picture. And in fact, here you can see my great-grandparents here, and then my grandparents were married there August 1st, 1936. And the celebrities sitting in the second row right here, my parents were married there September 20th, 1958. And my girlfriend in the front row here, we were married there September, what was that? 19th, 1987. So here you can see the church on its present location right after it was moved there. Here you can see pictures of the inside. This is right about 1920, and then the altar area. In 1949, transepts were added to the structure. Here you can see the transepts are going across right here, and then on the outside you can see the transept here, and there's a matching one on the other side. In 1970, the new church was built, and there's the interior of it. How many Episcopalians? Yeah, there they are. Do the wave. Okay, let's move on to the Methodists. How many have we got here? Hey! November 1884, the Methodist Church was started. And it was started in this building right here, which they delicately called Morse's Hall at the time. It was a billiard hall and a dance hall, an amusement place, but most importantly, it was also a saloon. They didn't meet there for very long until they alternately moved into the Oddfellows Hall right here, and it's hard to see, it just kind of runs off the street right here. This was called Temperance Hall. It had just been finished in 1884. It was brand new. It was actually the upstairs of William Jones's general store. And it was really only, you've seen 1.5 story houses. It was kind of like a 1 3/4, so the upstairs only like about a 3/4 floor because of the pitch of the roof. So it wasn't very big, but they met there for a little while until they built their church. And
what was on the street with the big?
Oh, this is Memorial Day. This would have been right about 1890, 92. And so let's see, this building right here was my great-great-grandfather's building, and that would be where Country Look Antiques is today. So, and then this is going down towards Bull and Wren, down this way towards 2nd, and 3rd Street is down towards that side.
Who are the men standing in the row?
Well, these are all veterans of the Grand Army of the Republic from the Civil War. This is Leroy Francis Sampson right there. That's the only one that I've identified. So if you remember any of them, you let me know. The church actually took 1.5 years to build, and it was dedicated in 1886. Here you can see it was over on George Street, on the south side of the street, right across from Cortland. These are the first 10 ministers of the Methodist Church. Evidently, to be a Methodist minister, you had to have facial hair. And the Congregationalists didn't, the Catholics didn't, I don't know. It's just, these are the first 10 up through 1898, and they all had a beard or mustache and very little hair between them and God. 1897, they bought a house on the other side of the street. It was Kate Russell's house, and they turned that into their parsonage. here you can see at their 45th anniversary. And I don't know when, but the steeple all of a sudden is gone from that. I don't know when that occurred. And inside the old church, May 5th, 1955, they laid the cornerstone for their new church out on 3rd Street over towards Christmas Lake. 3rd Avenue, right. And inside, and what's one of the amazing features of this church is these beams that go all the way up are solid red oak. I mean, I don't know where you could find that today, but it's just an amazing thing. And inside the sanctuary, and then that's how it looked in 1959. In 1961, they finished the Christian education wing. Here you can see it in 1963. And then how it looked last spring, just a year ago today. The Universalist Church of Excelsior. Now, how many of people knew there was a Universalist Church? Good. It was Reverend Harrington organized the church on October 9, 1885. And it took them, from the time they started, it took them 2 years, from 1886 to 1888, to build this church. Before that, they were having services in the Oddfellows. Then they went across the bay to Lake Park. This is the Lake Park Hotel Amusement Hall. They had services there. And then they moved over here to Gates Pavilion. This is Water Street right here and Lake Street right here. So this is where the principal dock is, right at the foot of Water Street. This huge pavilion that was right there for about 10 years. After that, they moved to the town hall, and this is right where the old library is, over on 3rd Street. But in 1888, they finally dedicated and consecrated their church right here. Does anybody remember where this is located? Today it looks like this. The corner of First and Cortland. But they didn't last very long. It was August 20, 1893, and Reverend Skilling, he was the Universalist minister, preached his farewell sermon. That is the last universal service that I could find in this church. And from that on, the church was dormant. How many Catholics? There we go. They're here, represented. 1892 was the start of this parish. Does that jive with what you think? It was this man, Reverend Alexander Christie. He was the rector or minister at St. Stephen's in Minneapolis, and he decided he was going to have a mission out at Excelsior, and from then on, every summer, there were only summer services in Excelsior, but he would hold the services in the town hall, which was over here on 3rd Street. In 1903, Reverend Joseph Bush came out, and he took up where Reverend Christie left off. Reverend Christie was made a bishop in 1898, and he took off for the West Coast. And the man that was Reverend Christie's subordinate was Reverend Arctander. And Reverend Bush and Arctander formed the mission board that created the St. John the Baptist Catholic Parish here in Excelsior in 1903. And they did that by purchasing the old Universalist Church over on 1st Street. That's where they went, and that's how it looks now. In 1905, he built the Catholic Mission House. Now, Reverend Bush was the son of immigrants from Prussia. So you think, well, how did he afford to do this? It wasn't church money, it was his money. His immigrant parents were not ne'er-do-wells. His father was the president of a bank in Red Wing, Minnesota. So he had plenty of money and financial backing from his parents, especially after his father died in 1908. So he was able to build this all on his own because that's what the parish needed. Today, the house is owned by Rob and Kara Tyler. It's over on First Street, right across the street from the old parish. In 1952, Reverend Cushion decided that it was time to expand, and expanding meant taking care of the nuns and providing a school for the children. And he said that nuns had to be taken care of first. So in 1952, they built St. John's Parish School, and they abandoned the church on First Street, and the basement was then used for church purposes. It was in 1960 that the present church was built, and about the only difference you see is that the main doors are now, is it stone or concrete? It's stone.
No, phony baloney.
Phony baloney stoning? All right.
Doors out when they turned the church, and the main entrance is now on the side.
Right. The main entrance is now on the side of the building, but the church retains its mid-century modern styling. First Church of Christ Scientist. New church. They were started in 1901, and they were meeting in the upstairs of the Apgar block. Anybody know the Apgar block? Down on Water Street. Nobody remembers that that was built by Adrian E. Apgar, and so now the name Apgar is lost in Excelsior history. They eventually moved to the Universalist Church after the Universalist Church went, belly up in about 1893, and they rented this place from 1901 to October of 1903, when they were evicted by the Catholics. The Catholics purchased this church right from underneath them, and then they had to go and find a new home in the Oddfellows Hall right here on Water Street. They were there until 1908, when they bought the home of Dr. Brutton over at the corner of First and Center Street. Dr. Brutton had died, I think it was 1903, and his wife then turned this into a boarding house. It had 11 rooms into it. The Universalists, the Christ Scientists, they went in, they tore out the stairs going up and took out all the partitions below and only used the bottom floor, the main floor of the building, for church purposes. It wasn't until was it 1954 that they built this structure and replaced it. And in those intervening years, nobody had been upstairs, and so it was I heard it was quite the expedition, going up there and seeing all the layers of dust and the things that had been left behind up there. Today, it looks very much the same. It had an expansion in 1964 that you can see on the right side of the picture. The church had been on hard times for a lot of years, and in February of 2021, they disbanded, and in August of 2021, they sold the building to the city of Excelsior. And at this point, the future is undecided for this building. But that's the inside of what the sanctuary looks like in the 1950s. The People's Church. How many people from the People's Church here? I didn't think so. It was here for 1 year. It was a non-denominational church. It was based in Minneapolis, and Reverend Julian L. Morrill was the pastor. It was kind of a mission church. It was only here for the one summer that I could find, and it was located in the Minnetonka Casino that you can see right here. There was bowling alleys below and dance floor up above, and so I'm sure that this is where the upstairs is where the services were held. But he rented the house orchestra from the casino to play for church services, and the newspapers say it was packed all the time. So, and I should mention, casino is not a gambling place. In this time, it was a place of amusement and not gambling. So there's a, yeah. Okay, Our Savior's Lutheran Church. The first services were held in the town hall here over on 3rd Street, just across, oh, the sun went away, on 3rd Street, just across Water Street, September 9, 1923. They were there for about 6 months before they went across the town to the Excelsior Trinity Church, and Trinity Church very graciously allowed them to hold services there for about 3 years until 1927. 1927, they finished their basement church. And now if you look at this picture, this is the actual church, but it was just kind of leveled off right here. They couldn't afford to build the whole church. So until 1933, they held services in the basement. In 1933, they were able to add on the rest of the church. And that was dedicated October 8, 1933. In 1948, they became a self-supporting church. They had been part of what was Mount Olive and Redeemer Lutheran in Wayzata. Mount Olive was in Mound, and they became self-sustaining in 1948. They sold the church in 1958, and it became the apartments that are there today. Here you can see the church before, but in 1958, turning it into the apartments, they took the steeple off and turned it into what it is today. Yep, right across the street from where they'd been holding services for the previous 3 years at Trinity. And then in November 30, 1958, they dedicated their new church out on Highway 7 west of town. Okay, how many Mount Calvary people? There we are. May 4th, 1930, they held their very first services in the Masonic Lodge here on Water Street, just half a block from where we are today. And they were there actually for quite a long time. I don't think it was strictly a Lutheran thing, but they also had a basement church. So this is the church that they had in 1949, but in 1937 they finished their basement church. So just eliminate the top portion of this, and for 7 years they were in a basement, and from what I hear, it leaked all the time. So in 1949, when they dedicated the new church, they were very thankful for the new home. It was in 1959 that they changed their name from, what was it, the Excelsior Lutheran Church they changed it to Mount Calvary. So in 1949, they dedicated the upper portion of the sanctuary. And here you can see why they were so thankful. It was absolutely gorgeous in there. In 1962, they added an education wing, and in 1988, they finished the new sanctuary over here, and this is how you see it today. There was quite the controversy in the 1990s where they came in and they tore down all the houses on George Street and on William Street. People got very upset about that, but turned out well for the congregation. They're very thriving. I don't know which is bigger, Mount Calvary or St. John's. How many people from the Covenant Church? Yeah, good. We got some here. The first services to be held were June 10th, 1945. Here you can see the public is invited by New Church with meetings conducted in the Masonic Temple. So much of this, all these new churches, they didn't have a home, and they looked for any public place or semi-public place that they could find. That's a common theme. So this is the building where Excelsior Covenant Church was formed. 1954, they built this building. Still exists over on 3rd Avenue, right next door neighbor to the Methodist Church. In 1972, they sold the church to the Christian Missionary Alliance. Here you can see that. And then they went about building their own church. But in the meantime, 1972 to 73, they held their services at the elementary school here in Excelsior. In 1973, they dedicated their new church just off of Highway 7 east of town. And there you can see it. But the original church is still there. And since 1972, the Christ Community Church Christian and Missionary Alliance is still in that building, but now they are also joined by Bethel Fellowship Church. So they operate the church jointly, but they both churches use the same facility. Excelsior Baptist Church. How many here from the Excelsior Baptist Church? Nobody. Okay. In 1959, the Baptist Church was formed in the Odd Fellows Hall. Again. I couldn't find a 1959 picture, so this is 1978. That we'll have to do. But in 1960, they moved to the corner of 3rd and Morse Avenue, where they held services there. So this is the building up there. It's just on Morse Avenue and 3rd Street. In 1963, they moved to their new church out on Vine Hill and 101. New Hope Church of Scientology. Anybody remember this at all? August 23rd, 1976, they moved into Excelsior. They purchased this building. Anybody this familiar to anybody here? Jim Hillis, you worked there. National Tea Company. Now you remember it. They lasted until right about the summer of 1978, so not quite 2 years. And I found a note in our archives from Grace Knowlton that said they lasted here until they, quote, got run out of Excelsior. Okay, church activism. Churches have played an important part in the growth of our community, both as spiritual and a political level as well over the years. Here you can see an article from 1883 and it announces Mrs. L. May Wheeler of Indiana, and she's coming here and holding a meeting at the Congregational Church to discuss, oh my goodness, women's suffrage. The right to vote. Now, this was so far afield. I mean, this 1883, this was something that was hardly even on the radar of anybody. Not that there was radar in 1883. But I mean, this was almost 3 decades before it really became a national initiative. So this was very much on the forefront. This was also the first year that I find the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WCTU, coming into Excelsior. And their meetings were alternately held in the Congregational and the Methodist Episcopal Church. These two churches at the time were the formative churches in Excelsior. The Episcopal Church was kind of hibernating after Reverend Chamberlain left. There weren't regular services at the Episcopal Church, which left just the Congregational Church and the Methodist Church. This is Galpin Hall of the Excelsior Academy, and Excelsior Academy was formed in 1884, and the cornerstone was laid May 27, 1885, but the building wasn't finished until 1886. The Excelsior Academy was essentially a prep school. It was and operated by the Congregational Church, or rather loosely operated by the Congregational Church. Tuition for residents was free. If you came from outside the community, you had to pay. It was essentially a prep school for people wanting to go on to college. At that time, most public schools were K through 8. So anything after that, you had to go to the big city, but the Excelsior Academy filled its place. By 1888, they were running into financial problems, and I think, from what I can find, they didn't operate in 1888. In 1889, it was the Disciples of Christ that formed here in Excelsior, and they wanted to create a Christian college here. It didn't take root until 1891 when they opened up the Northwest Christian College. And this was an actual college. They had bachelor's degrees and everything in there, but they had business classes, ministerial classes, but it was also catering to women as well, so that they could take shorthand and learn to typewrite. Sorry, but that's the world they lived in. But what's kind of strange about this, that with all these older, students in there, they also operated a kindergarten. So that was, they started in that 1892 and then discontinued it in 1894. On December 6, 1896, the building burned, and all of those instructors and students scattered and left Excelsior. Now, that might not be such a big loss, but it had a huge impact on Excelsior, their disappearance. And here you can see why. February 5, 1897, wet. It says wet up there at the very top. That means that the citizens of Excelsior voted for the sale of alcohol in Excelsior for the very first time. Now, all these students, and they're ranged from a low of 50 to a high enrollment of 70. Most of those students, if they were male anyway, could vote. And there were also a dozen instructors who could also vote. So if you take a look at this chart, 1897, the vote was 61 to 56. So by losing, probably a couple dozen votes from the Christian college, Excelsior went wet, and that margin remained rather slim right up into the 20th century. So it had a real big impact on things. The fight against alcohol in Excelsior, which now we're talking about churches in a brewery, was definitely led by the ministers of the Congregational and the Methodist Church. And here you can see a court case, and was it K.L. Davidson, who was arrested for operating a blind pig. And a blind pig is essentially an illegal bar, selling liquor without a license. This is 1894 that this happened. And Reverend Turner, right over here from the Congregational Church, he decided, well, I'm going to trap these people, and he hired detectives to go into Davidson's place of business, and they came back out and said, oh yeah, we bought all kinds of alcohol in there. Well, Davidson was eventually acquitted. These ministers were out to get them by any means possible. It didn't matter. The ends justified the means. The Methodists were doing the same thing. Reverend S.T. Show over here was a former pastor through 1895, but he still lived in the area. Reverend Donald McKenzie came in 1902. You can see a 1904 article where he announced to his congregation that he had just come from a saloon. And he explained that he was, there checking out on things and saying that, he was only there to catch them in the act, that they had their window shades down to conceal the people drinking, that they were doing a good business on a Sunday, which was illegal in Excelsior. He was trying to hold their toes to the fire and make sure they obeyed the letter of the law. And here's another thing that they did. Religious leaders will hold forth in September a large tabernacle to be erected on Water Street. Work to commence soon. So right where we are right now, they had this huge tent and they called a tabernacle for a revival, and to tell people to stay away from alcohol. Wets and dries clash with vim at Excelsior. Fred Hawkins, leader of the liquid faction, in jail for illegal booze selling. And I feel almost sorry for Fred Hawkins, because it was really a vendetta against him by the Methodist ministers and the congregational ministers. They were really out to get him. He was charged with selling alcohol to minors. Well, it turned out, those minors actually broke into his basement and stole a keg of beer. Things of that nature. Not to say that Fred Hawkins didn't bend the rules a little bit, but it got to the point where Fred Hawkins here sued the congregational minister, Carl Swain, because of the things that he did. He was acquitted of these 1909 charges, and then was asking for $3,225 in reparations, because when he was arrested, the law gave the city the permission to confiscate all of his bar equipment. So he was out a lot of money from all this. No indication of what came with the lawsuit. But Reverend McKenzie, he went on to keep fighting against alcohol in favor of prohibition. He died in Duluth at a conference up there, and it was said that it could have been potassium cyanide of potassium cyanide, that killed him. And they're saying that he made so many enemies like Fred Hawkins that it's possible that Fred Hawkins might have killed him. But here's Fred Hawkins of Excelsior was arrested at that time, will not be forced for trial under agreement that he would sell out his place and leave the vicinity of Excelsior. Those interested in his prosecution agreed not to press the case. Mr. Hawkins left Excelsior in September after having sold his property. So they essentially run him out of town, just like the Scientologists. How many people remember this? The Church Softball League. Yeah, it started after World War II and lasted for well into the 1970s, the late 70s. I still remember Al Clegg at the Congregational Church was part of the softball team. And I thought, man, that guy is so old. How does he play softball? He was probably 60. Yeah, Paul Starr, right here it says, Excelsior Church League playoffs got off to a hectic start last week. In the 2 first-round games, the Catholic 9, which tied with the Excelsior Lutheran Club for the top spot in the final standings, was set back by a strong second-place Methodist team in the first game of the playoffs. The Methodists won 12-7 behind the pitching of Paul Stark. The winners pulled away in the second frame and stayed there all the way. Don Roy and Norman Howard toiled for the losers. In the other bracket of last week's first round, Trinity copped the thriller from the Excelsior Lutherans 9-7 with a Frank Merriwell finish that saw the Episcopalians' Rich Comer blast a home run with the bases loaded to win the ball game in the last inning. Chuck Stark was the winning hurler while E. Johnson threw 9-hit ball for the losers. It was a 0-0 ball game for the 3 innings, and the Lutherans picked up a 4-1 lead after 4 innings of play. The Trinity Club closed the gap by the 6th inning to 4-3, and then blasted ahead with 6 runs in the fatal. I don't know. It chops off right there. I didn't include the rest of the article, but if you come and see me any Wednesday at the archives between 10 and 1, I will get you the answer. So come and see me. What time have we got now?
Almost 8 o'clock.
Almost 8 o'clock? Well, I have just a couple minutes. I got something else that I wasn't allowed, or I didn't ask permission to talk about, but this is City Hall, the town hall, and here you can see up here there is a fire bell. 1893 they bought a fire bell right after the Sampson House fire of November 8th, 1893. And they hung that up there. I thought it would be a good idea. 1899 they started ringing that bell as a curfew at 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock during the winters. 1923, they retired the bell and they put up a siren right up here, which from 1923 on sounded curfew. In December 4, 1954 is when they started sounding that siren at noon, 6, and 9. So it's been, 70, almost 70 years now that siren's been sounded off. After they tore down the old town hall in 1955 to make way for the west parking lot, they mounted it on top of City Hall, the new City Hall that you can see here. The siren is now silent. It was taken down February 16th of this year. It will be restored. The developer, Red Leaf Partners, is going to make it a centerpiece of the new development. So hopefully in 2024, we'll be hearing the siren again. I just thought it was a prescient matter that you let people know it's not gone, it's coming back. And with that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Isn't there a
She's asking if there's a UU church in Tonka Bay, and I'm talking about Excelsior, so I don't know. In the back.
I lost count. How many churches in total?
I covered 14. I didn't include Baywind because they were only here for a few months before they moved back to Navarre. So 15 that I've come up with. Yes.
Yeah, the cemetery that's on our Highway 7 across from those churches out on 3rd Avenue, whose cemetery is that?
Okay, the cemetery on the big hill across from the churches, that's called Oak Hill Cemetery, and it was a private cemetery run by an association until it was taken over by the city, or the city was kind of forced to take it over in the 1950s. So that belongs to the city of Excelsior. Resurrection Cemetery, which is farther east on Highway 7 on the south side, was purchased by Reverend Cushion of the St. John the Baptist in 1925, and that's when that cemetery started. In the back.
You had a newspaper article about a softball tournament or softball game,
Yes.
and you mentioned that Paul Stark was a pitcher.
Yes.
but
Paul
then
Stark was a pitcher.
Also said Chuck Stark.
Yeah, I didn't know him.
Okay, so did Paul have a brother, or who was that gentleman?
I don't know who that gentleman is, but also at the same time, following World War II, there was also a church basketball league. So there's, yes, Bev?
I'm thinking that maybe they meant Paul because Paul was a pitcher. And in the previous paragraphs, it did say he was the hermit, right?
It could be Paul. Newspaper editors have been known to make mistakes.
We know his wife, Paul's wife goes to
Nina.
church. Nina, we can ask her next Sunday, who is Chuck Stark?
There you go.
Wait a minute, wait. Hasn't Nina Stark passed away?
No, Nina Stark is alive. She's living in Glen Lake.
Wait a minute, which
Paul's wife.
What?
Paul's wife is still,
Yeah.
my mother's best friend is still alive? I thought she had passed away. Did she live where?
Anyone else? Oh, my mother wants me to say something. She wants me to point out that in the curb on this, over here on 3rd Street alongside the Congregational Church, there are still metal rings about this big around that are still there from tying up horses. So if you've got nothing better to do this spring, go take a walk down 3rd Street and take a look at how they used to do things. Yes, Mother?
My grandfather went to that church when he was a kid. And when they tied up the horse to go into the church for the service, if the service went more than 1 hour, that pony or horse would start to whinny. I want to go home.
Oh, you can. Yes, in the back.
Well, I'm speaking for my bashful friend here, who has in her purse the picture of her great.
My great-great-grandfather and grandmother were Charles and Mary Sheldon. From the Congregational Church.
Where the horse Winnie.
You have their pictures up there.
Yes.
I'll add a fun fact about Trinity. You mentioned that it was made from cement, right? Which was high tech at the time. If you look closely at the cement walls of the chapel, you can see crustaceans because the materials were taken from the lake. Wow. You can see little shells.
Yep. She was saying that if you go over to Trinity Chapel, you look at very closely at the construction of the concrete walls. You can see the refuse brick, the stones, the pieces of wood, and the snails that are embedded into the concrete. Because all the sand and materials came from the shores of Lake Minnetonka. The lime came from Shakopee, but all the sand and all the other building materials came from the lake shore.
Regarding the Stark, Paul Stark at one time was mayor.
Yes, Paul was mayor of Excelsior at one time, and a brother named Roy.
And my uncle.
And Jean's uncle. Yes.
I was the chaplain for Boy Scout troop at Mount Calvary, and one of the things the boys had to do was learn about the history of Mount Calvary. And an interesting thing they found was that when they had a congregational meeting on the property, decided whether they wanted to buy the property and build a church, they passed the hat to take a collection to get things started. Well, they also, in the hat, after the collection, they found bottle caps, streetcar tokens, washers, and other things where people had made a donation that either couldn't afford to or disagreed.
All right, well, thank you all for coming out.